See. Let's see. Hopefully that fixed it. Looked like my internet went out there. Let me reboot. Looked like my internet went out there. Let me reboot. Okay. That looks like it's working. Sorry about that. Let's go back. We were talking about voices and tones. I'm not sure where exactly we truly lost connection, but I'll go back to that because I had been on that for a little bit before I got a notice that I lost my connection. So, as I was saying, you can always go from doing a accent, if you can do accents, like the Swedish Chef, or really bad Scottish Robin Williams kind of Scottish accent, often with a lot of inflection there, uh, rolling the R's and such. You can do the Peanuts parents, wah, 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 which could indicate they're speaking a language nobody speaks. So you don't understand them, but you can tell by their tone and that wah, wah, that they're disappointed or sad, and it puts their personality through and their current mood through to the players. Um, you can use your tone, and a good way to modify your tone is when you're up and bubbly, you sit straight up, your posture is good, you're not slouched, and you're up and you're bubbly and you start to talk really fast, like a lot of gnomes will do. You're not even really changing your voice; you're just speaking a lot faster. And sometimes just the enthusiasm as they speak makes it seem like it's a lot faster, but you're really not talking super fast. And you repeat yourself a lot, but that's okay because that's what gnomes are known to do. They're a little scatterbrained, but that's okay too. And that's something you can do for a type of voice system. And when you want to be all grumpy and depressed, like Eeyore, you slouch your shoulders and you hunch down over what you're doing and you start to speak slower and more drawn out. Might sound bored or depressed. Okay, what'll it be? Like you're the bored bartender who's heard it all before, is getting tired of their life, and they're just waiting for their time to close up and go rest up for another hectic day. And then there's a medium voice, which is just kind of in your normal posture. You're not super uptight and straight or speaking real fast. You're not depressed or um, sad or lonesome or just gruff. And so you're not hunched over and doing a deep, slow voice. High voices are happy and excited, and low voices, deep voices are depressed. Even though you could be surprised that some really deep voiced people or some very upbeat people, James Earl Jones, who did the voice of Darth Vader, could be a very happy individual. Some of the most influential voices in TV and movies, very distinct voices, can portray all kinds of emotions, even though their voice falls into one of those subcategories. Uh, Kiefer Sutherland is a voice that you probably instantly recognize if you're into Kiefer Sutherland movies. Of course, Morgan Freeman. Who doesn't know Morgan Freeman? He did March of the Penguins, basically a documentary about a bunch of penguins. It wasn't my cup of tea. I'm not into documentaries, but just listening to Morgan Freeman's voice was worth it for a lot of people. They get a voice that a lot of people will say it's like chocolate. You want to listen to it. So use your different inflections to master your voice. And then you don't have to necessarily do voices per se. But if you can do voices, that's great. Um, but don't try to super exceed your comfort level. Gradual, build up to it. Maybe instead of doing every NPC in a voice, um, just pick one NPC per session that you really want to give a distinct voice to. And you could be like, Yumpin Yimini. Oh, yeah, that's definitely the truth. Or you could be, well, well, me boyo, come over here and let's have a natter and talk about it, and use colloquialisms. Because colloquialisms, like Cockney phrases, will help get you into character. I mean, if you've ever watched Oliver Twist, the Artful Dodger is partly the Artful Dodger because of how he talks, not just the accent, but what words he says. He even doesn't quite pronounce things quite right. Is I'd do anything for you, dear. Anything instead of anything, leaves anything. Or Canadians are known for saying all the time. You can add that into your game to represent certain regions and types of characters or races. Most people think of dwarves as being Irish or Scottish, although more accurately they'd probably be Scandinavian. There's more Scandinavian myths of dwarfs than just about any, but that's something. Elves are supposed to be a musical nature race, using something like French accents would be really good for elves. Maybe French for the wood elves, but maybe the more high elves would be a cultured British accent, or something in the Australian bent. People who are tieflings could be of different accents. You could use an Indian type of accent. By Indian here, I mean Middle Eastern Indian, not necessarily Native American Indian, but you could do Native American accents too, although I would avoid sayings like how and kimosabi, because it begins to sound a little bit cheesy when you use those. But those are the ways that you can use your tone if you can't necessarily do voices. Um, and like I said, those are what you use to bring across a differentiation of NPCs. So the players will start to see that not every NPC is the same. And because you're using a special voice or intonation with an NPC, they might put more weight in what that NPC is saying because you are focusing their attention on that NPC. Now, NPCs also, as the next point, say have goals. Remember, they aren't always either for or against the PCs. Not every NPC is an enemy or an ally. Sometimes they're a bystander, or they're just in it for a buck. The merchant's more likely to be in it for a buck than necessarily wanting to help or hurt the NPC or the PCs. If he thinks that he can get future business from that PC, he might help them out. On the other hand, selling them out to their enemies might make him a pretty penny as well, so he might do that. He might play both sides. A lot of people tend to make NPC merchants that are always trying to cheat the characters, always bumping up the prices, not willing to haggle, or being really hard to haggle with, things of that nature. And so people get to where they don't trust their NPCs. I like, again, and I'm going to refer to Matt Mercer in this, because he likes to make his NPCs presentable and friendly to the PCs. He will offer them some fair prices, and at other times he's going to offer them a little bit higher price. And it's just going to kind of depend on the market and what's being asked and why. If he realizes that the PCs are getting ready to go help the village he's currently working in, and it's to his best interest to cut them a break, then an NPC merchant is going to cut them a break. But they have goals, and you can have secret goals for the NPCs and public goals. Public goal for a merchant is to make money, feed his family, to move into a bigger, better location, maybe in the rich quarter of town, to not get shut down by the local constabulary or bled dry by the local thieves guild. Those are goals that the NPCs have, and that's why those NPCs are also often excellent providers of story hooks, because they do have these goals, and they're more working towards their goals than they are working towards the PC's goals or against them. Sometimes those goals will align, and sometimes they'll be at odds, and sometimes they won't have anything to do with it at all, but it might be a nice side quest that you can get. So remember to give them goals. And that goes down to the on the cuff or on the fly NPC. Keep notes whenever you introduce a new NPC. If you did not plan for that NPC to have a name and a family and a profession and a background, the players will surprise you and they're going to ask for it. Players will always surprise you. So keep a cheat sheet to flesh them out. In the DM tips with Satine Phoenix, several people have come on and given tips exactly towards this. And like Matt Mercer, like I said, I refer to him a lot because I do like his style of DMing. I've been doing it actually longer than he's been alive, but that doesn't mean I can't learn something new from him. One of these days I will get this right. But he keeps different notes of like personalities that he can randomly pick. Taliesin Jaffe, who of course played Percy in the first season of Critical Role, and is now their resident Furbolg, whose name escapes me at the moment. I'm a little behind in the second campaign, which is okay. It gives me more to look forward to. But his first character, Mollymook, was a tiefling showman, but he came on and talks about the seven dwarfs, and having a little cheat sheet with it has each of the seven dwarfs' names on it, because each dwarven name in that fairy tale has a distinct personality subset, and you can put the quirks in there and use that dwarf as a reminder of how you played that NPC. So if you have to play that NPC again at a later time, you can fall back into the same quirks. And the more and more consistent you are with the NPC, the more that NPC is going to come alive. So you do want to take notes for your on-the-fly PCs and have notes you can refer to. And that includes things like having a list of names or name generator on your phone that you can quickly pull up for different races and different genders. And then in your notes for that game session, make sure to write down what the name was, what the personality subset was. If you use the seven dwarfs, put down this one was Dopey, this one was Grumpy, this was Doc, this one was Sleepy and yawned all the time. Put notes down so that when the next time you meet up with this guy or girl, she acts the same. She acts consistent, or purposely doesn't act consistent, which might clue in the players if they've been consistent for 3 or 4 or 5 different meetings and suddenly change their tune. They're going to possibly be looking for an angle, and that might be a great way to draw them into your hook. And then finally, as a closing thing for NPCs, when you're building your engaging NPCs and your run-of-the-mill and on-the-fly NPCs, you're never going to know which NPC the PCs are going to bond with. They're going to make a connection. They're either, maybe declare this as their mortal enemy or their best friend, or they just get a really close bond with an NPC. And it may or may not end up being the characters that you've tied into their backgrounds. It's nice if you can tie them into their backgrounds, because that it gives that another angle to bring out the realism and the investiture, the immersion in the game. But sometimes it's not. If you have a street urchin in the game, and really the urchin just comes up and begs for coins or candy from the players whenever they come into town, but you've got a soft-hearted cleric that takes a shine to this urchin later on, and this can be kind of mean, you might think, but later on, when several children in the village or town are kidnapped by the cultists, um, little Sally the urchin was one of the ones kidnapped, which is going to motivate the characters to go after the cultists more than necessarily an offer of a reward. Small villages can often not afford a great big reward, and really, let's face it, in 5th edition D&D, there's not a whole bunch to spend money on unless you're like a wizard, or you're going to spend a lot of time on downtime activities or magic items, and you're limited to 3 attuned magic items, and not a lot of DMs necessarily put items out for sale. So you're not necessarily always motivate your players with gold, but a good NPC bond will motivate your players. If you look at your characters' bonds in their character sheet, a lot of times a bond will not let a fallen ally behind. Like the Marines, no man left behind, or must stamp out suffering wherever you find it, or cannot abide slavery. These are kind of bonds and or flaws, depending on how they're written into the character, that you can play off of with these NPC bonds. This is where you're rounding it out and you're tying it all together into your story. And like I said, this works in any game. If you're playing a very political intrigue, Vampire the Masquerade game, you're going to be knee deep in NPCs and intrigue and espionage. Even though it's a great mechanical system for combat, it's actually really, really focused on the role play pillar of play. If you're going to be playing in a super science world like Star Trek, where it's way advanced science, but generally speaking, pretty plausible science, as opposed to like space opera, which would be Star Wars. You're going to handle some NPCs different than others. There were characters that people remember from these shows, and take your inspiration from shows, even if it doesn't seem to match the genre you're in or the characters you're playing with. You can still borrow from TV shows. I love to borrow from TV shows when I'm basing some of my characters' personality traits. I mean, who doesn't remember, if you're a Star Trek Next Generation fan, Q? I mean, he's irritating. He's semi-omniscient. He is always got something to prove to Picard, and Picard almost always not almost always ends up getting the better of him, or one of his officers does. So Q is a memorable character. Guinan is really an extra, not a main character, but she's enigmatic. She's hinted at being at least on par in power to the Q, but you never quite know. But she was able to intimidate Q in an episode or two. So those are kind of characters you can borrow from. If you ever watch the TV show Leverage with Timothy Hutton, it's probably the best modern day party of all rogues I've ever seen. It's using modern day rogue subclasses. So you have a hacker, a hitter, a mastermind, a thief, and a grifter. So you got 5 different rogue subclasses working together and doing jobs. So you can totally base a band of thieves in your Shadowrun game, which is more modern, on them. Their hacker would be a decker. Their grifter is a con artist, or like a street shaman maybe. Their cat burglar is really a second story person. with maybe wired reflexes or something like that as a augmentation. And their hitter is maybe like a street samurai type. And sometimes I'll confuse Rifts and Shadowrun, but they're both the same basic genre. I just prefer Shadowrun over Rifts, but that's a preference. There's a game out there for everybody, and I don't diss anybody. Play the game you want to play. But take those tips from those characters in those shows and use them to help influence how you build your NPCs. It might even lend yourself to what voices you want to give them. You might not be able to perfectly imitate their voice, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. If they don't make the connection between leverage and your character, but they recognize the distinct voice, they just don't know where you're getting it from, they might think that you made that voice up on the fly, or they're always trying to figure out where they know that voice from because it's just enough like Timothy Hutton's voice, or just enough like the one that plays Elliot or the one that plays Hardison, that they are constantly trying to remember what you're trying to remind them of. And so these are ways to flesh out your NPCs. Fleshing out your NPCs, making them engaging, drawing your players into the game is really the goal here. It's an entire pillar of the game, the interaction pillar, and they're going to be dealing with NPCs of all different stations, from the evil villain who may or may not first present himself to the parties as an ally in disguise. It might even be the helpful person who gives them the hook might actually end up being your NPC. And he might use two different voices and inflections when he's playing the two different roles, because he's two-faced like that. You're going to deal with kings and queens and noblemen. You're going to deal with tavern keeps and blacksmiths. Or in a futuristic game, you're going to be dealing with mechanics and Mr. Smith, who are going to give out the runs for Shadowrun. Or in Call of Cthulhu, you're going to be dealing with occultists and other people that sell or deal in occult artifacts, or private investigators. If you're playing military games, you're going to be dealing with medics and sergeants and drill sergeants and generals and what have you. No matter what you play. If you play Star Wars, you're going to be dealing with Jedis and Force adepts and Gungan traders and all these different things. And droids. And droids in Star Wars have personality. Droids are not just mechanical robots. They have personality. And so they're truly NPCs. These are the kind of things that you're going to be dealing with. And so it's an entire pillar of play. It's technically 1/3 of any role-playing game. I say technically because, as I said, different games have different mixes of the three pillars, and a lot of early games are 75% combat, or even almost 100%. What you call a hack and slash game is a sequence of combats. There are exploration games where you're doing the Lewis and Clark thing and just going out and mapping the new continent, or going into the labyrinth, and the Minotaur might be in the labyrinth, but you're doing twists and turns and mapping and trying not to get lost more than you are fighting the Minotaur. In classic Greek mythology, of course, that's where the labyrinth came from, and the Minotaur was cursed offspring that was turned into a bull man and locked up in the labyrinth as its protector and prisoner. And so these are the things you're going to deal with, and this is how you build a mythology around some of your NPCs. You build a backstory. You add to it as games progress. If a certain NPC that you meant to be a one-shot starts to make repeated appearances in your game, that's probably a good idea, that maybe that's one that the characters are starting to get a bond with. That's why they're seeking that NPC out. Or it could be someone you're trying to force a bond with because you keep popping them into the game. But give them personalities. Give them goals. Give them inflections and tones and voices if you can. But by no means is any of that required. You do not have to be the best improv actor in the world to DM a Dungeons and Dragons game. Some people find voices distracting. Some players find voices distracting. I saw a post about that just the other day, how a DM had warned people in session 0 that he used voices, and then right after his first real session, somebody came by and said, your voices are just not doing it for me, and that's distracting. And not every player is going to mesh with every table or every gaming style. But if you flesh out your NPCs, if you give them personality, make them more than just a mob, a mobile from like an MMO with scripted speech, but make them actually somebody that the characters can bond with on a good or negative spectrum, they're going to remember those NPCs. And that means that their hooks are going to have more impact. The game world is going to have more impact. You're going to be able to kill some time in adventures too, because a lot of times during downtime, and I'm not talking about the downtime activities in 5th edition, but rather downtime between major arcs when they're doing stuff like shopping in the city or going through the town looking for information before they go back out to the dungeon area. Now you put dungeon in quotes because it could be a series of caves, could be an old monastery. The dungeon could be a city layout. But before they go to the encounter zone, be it locked in dungeon or sandboxy area, oftentimes they will do some other stuff in a more populated, quote unquote, civilized area. And that's where they're going to meet NPCs of all different races and sizes, colors and genders and otherworldly beings that they're going to interact with. And the more you bring those alive, the more you're going to bring your game alive. I do want to thank you all for listening to me ramble. Now, this did get broken up partly because I lost internet connection a little bit earlier. I'm not sure how it broke as far as the video goes, but I will be trying to upload this to my YouTube channel as well. What I'll probably do is have to upload it in 2 parts because of what happened. But I do want to thank you for checking out our RPG College videos in the Raw. This is when I did a poll in our local gaming group on Facebook of what panel I should do at VisionCon. This was the most requested panel by a big margin. Everybody wanted to know how to build NPCs and make it more engaging. So I hope that some of you will have a chance to learn from this. Nobody was actually in the channel really during the broadcast and Twitch, but I will try to upload this to my YouTube channel. And for those who listen to my Twitch and don't know my YouTube channel, you can look me up under Gamer Seuss. I will also try to put my YouTube channel in comments sometimes. I haven't done it yet, but I'll probably do that soon if people really want it. And of course, my Twitch channel, for those who will listen to this on YouTube, is twitch.tv/GamerSeuss. Thank you all for participating in videos in the Raw. Good or bad, it's done raw and uncut. Thank you and have a good morning. I have to get ready for my doctor's appointment now.